We have a new kid on the block, Windows Server 2025. There are a few, not many, I must say not many updates, but that little quantity of what's new is still pretty exciting. My name is Alexander Golev, as you can see on the screen, and I'm the consulting and services lead and SAMexpert, one of the founders of the company. Well, we provide various services around Microsoft, which are purely for cost saving and optimization. Whichever you can think about Microsoft and costs, licensing costs, cloud costs, audit defense, reducing the audit penalties, compliance checks, infrastructure design for reduced costs. That's what we do. And we don't sell licenses. We are a deliberately independent company. That is so we can give you advice without looking back at Microsoft and thinking, what will Microsoft say about this? Use chapters to quickly navigate between the chapters, between the various parts of this training. Look in the description for useful links. There are useful links that I'll be talking about. You can open them now. You can study things, especially about new stuff, and check for updates. And the reason why I'm saying check for updates is because we are doing this live in a very peculiar time. Microsoft Ignite is on, and things change on a daily basis. We do not expect a lot to change around Windows Server 2025, except for they need to clarify pay-as-you-go. We'll get through it in a few minutes. So check for updates. And especially if you're watching this video in 2025, then some things may change. So come back to our YouTube channel, come back to our LinkedIn feed, and just see what we published on that subject, because things may change. What you will learn today, what's new in Windows Server 2025? Windows Server on premises, Windows Server in the cloud, System Center. I'm going to only talk about server management, not client management, and what is Core Infrastructure Suite and how this all applies to Core Infrastructure Suite. So that's all around Windows Server and System Center 2025. There's a disclaimer, we're not Microsoft. Whatever we say here, if I make a mistake, and you then make a mistake based on my mistake, we waive all responsibility. If you want to know the exact Microsoft terms and make sure that whatever you hear, whatever you read anywhere, by the way, even on Microsoft blogs, even on learn.microsoft.com, verify it with product terms. Because if there's a conflict between product terms and learn.microsoft.com or any guide, any other documentation, even from Microsoft, in all the disputes, only the rules in the product terms apply. It's that strict. It's like a law. On other resources of Microsoft itself, things may be wrong. And we've just recently witnessed that. It wasn't pleasant. This is all about practical knowledge. This is what we do. And all this material comes from battle scars. It's not theory. We're not theoretical trainers. We are a consulting company. We use it on a daily basis. And the link to Microsoft product terms is under the description of the video. Let's start with what's new. And I must give you not even a warning. We don't do this training for YouTube engagement. So you can watch this one section, what's new, and just move off, because the rest, not much has changed. There are nuances, but not much has changed in Windows Server 2025 licensing. All the other things, except for the new things, remain the same. So if you know Windows Server licensing, watch this section, and then you can go and do your other daily chores. What's new? Pay-as-you-go billing with Azure Arc. That is new for Windows Server. Azure Arc software assurance requirement for Windows Server server management. That is new. It didn't exist before. It's a new product. It's very much hot off the press. And Azure Stack HCI was renamed to Azure Local. Otherwise, all the other changes are technical. I need to tell you about one that we just discussed with my big friend Carl on LinkedIn. He said that it's fortunate that Azure Update Manager remains free because Windows Server Update Services, WSAS, is discontinued. I disagree with that statement. Azure Update Manager is not free. Azure Update Manager is part of the Azure Arc management pack. So first of all, you need to connect it to Azure Arc. Fine, that is free of charge, but it requires an active subscription. It's not free. It requires either a subscription license, so it's a requirement. You can't use it with a perpetual license, or it requires an active software assurance subscription. And software assurance, we used to say it's maintenance. It's not maintenance. It's a subscription add-on license. That's what it is, essentially. So Azure Update Manager isn't free. Windows Server Pay-as-you-go, I think the idea is brilliant. The idea was to give clients an ability to use elastic temporary workloads on-premise as they do in Azure, billed per hour. That's a wonderful idea. And if you look at the conditions of use on this slide, this is a copy-paste from the Microsoft website. Customer may use pay-as-you-go subscription option as long as it is registered with customer's Azure subscription. It's an Azure subscription. The server is on-premise, paid via an Azure subscription. And it must be connected to customer's Azure subscription over the internet at least once every 30 consecutive calendar days. And by the way, if it's not connected, it will continue billing you. We'll get to that. Customer may not work around any mandatory registration or sign-up process. Now look at the license restrictions that are currently in the product terms. And every licensing consultant I spoke to, everyone is immensely confused. I don't know why they rushed it like this. Nobody knows. Hopefully it will be clarified. But the way the licensing restrictions are currently formulated, we suggest our clients, especially in Germany, Germans are very strict about it must be written exactly as it is supposed to be. We suggest actually not to use it because of these inconsistencies. The first line says, a customer must have a valid Windows Server Standard or Windows Server Datacenter license. What license? It's a pay-as-you-go option. The way it was supposed to be, which actually transpires just from our conversations with Microsoft people and Microsoft representatives, not from the documents, is they wanted to give an option. You either pay for a license or you pay as you go. Why are they saying that you need a license? That is the main stumble block right now. That is the main point that is confusing as it could possibly be. And then it says for licensed server running pay-as-you-go virtual machines, there are no restrictions on the number of pay-as-you-go virtual machines. I won't read it. The last 4 bits on this slide basically say one subscription is for one operating system. All this wording is just for each OSE, you need a separate subscription. That's what it says. You can do this exercise yourselves. You'll see that I'm right. What it should have been, and this is not official, it's a proposal. I'm a dreamer, so we sent it to Microsoft, because we think that it's what it is supposed to be. So please be careful. This is not official terms. I hope something like this will become official terms. OSE with enabled pay-as-you-go subscriptions don't require Windows Server and Windows Server CAL licenses. By the way, this is not something I made up. Microsoft's documentation, not product terms, not product terms. Microsoft's other documentation twice mentions that Windows Server CALs are not required for this subscription. I tend to believe this. Again, it's not in product terms. So if you're in Germany, don't use it. Then Windows Server RDS CALs and Windows Server RMS CALs licenses are required per the relevant licensing terms for the agreement type. This is optional. Actually, I included this as an option so people are clear that although Windows Server CALs are not required, RDS CALs and RMS CALs are always required regardless. One pay-as-you-go subscription permits the use of one Windows Server OSE, physical or virtual, and no additional virtualization rights are granted. It's just copying what Microsoft said before. To be honest, it's just to reinforce the third point here. This is what we believe from the conversations with non-licensing people at Microsoft it was supposed to be. So hopefully, this is what it will be. But you can start testing it on free subscriptions. There is a 7-day trial. Let's go to other additional information from the unofficial Microsoft sources. I believe everything here is valuable, critical, crucial to know, and a lot of it will be one day confirmed, should be one day confirmed in the Microsoft product terms. Azure Pay-as-you-go subscription is edition agnostic. Azure Arc Pay-as-you-go subscription for Windows Server. So your on-premise server, whether you deploy Windows Server Standard or Windows Server Datacenter, regardless of that edition, the cost is the same. Exactly replicating the rules in Azure. In Azure, it doesn't matter what edition of the operating system you deploy. If you deploy it from the images, it will always be Datacenter. But you may use Windows Server Standard licenses with AHUB. It's edition agnostic. It doesn't matter what edition of the OS runs. Unofficial Microsoft documentation, including learn.microsoft.com, says that that is true. So hopefully it will become a part of the product terms. Again, from the unofficial sources, Windows Server CALs aren't required as in Azure. It's an Azure subscription. So it seems like they're just following the overall rules of Azure licensing. It requires a retail image. This is a technical requirement that is written on the learn.microsoft.com. Why retail image? Why can't I use a volume licensing image? There's no answer to that. So we have people who tested that, and they said, no, we weren't able to deploy it from a volume licensing image. We took a retail or an MSDN image, and we were able to deploy Windows Server with the pay-as-you-go option. Do not activate the operating system with a key before you enable pay-as-you-go. If you activate it with a key, you won't be able to enable pay-as-you-go anyhow. It's one of the activation options. So you'll be given an option to install the Azure Arc connector. And then when you're activating the server, it will give you an option to either activate it with a key or use pay-as-you-go. There's a video on YouTube. I didn't link it, but it's easy to find, with a guy who, on the 3rd of November, actually deployed it and published a video. So you can see all these screenshots. It's a very nice technical video, so watch it after the training. There's a 7-day free of charge trial period, again, from the unofficial source. It was already confirmed by the people who tried. So there is a 7-day trial period. It takes 24 hours to react to the change of course. It takes 24 hours to react to deleting the connection. If you just delete the machine and forget to disconnect it from the billing, it will continue to be billed. So please pay attention to that. If your machine stops talking to Azure for 30 days, it will not stop billing you. It'll continue billing you. Only uninstalling the agent won't stop billing. You must delete and disconnect the pay-as-you-go machine, or the billing won't stop. You'll be punished for being inaccurate, so please be careful. Otherwise, wonderful feature, I think. What's unknown to us yet, what's unknown to me and to my team yet, is we don't know, because we haven't seen billing records, for how many cores you'll be billed. If you know licensing, and we'll talk about licensing, we'll finish with this heavy what's new part and move on to nitty-gritty basics of the licensing. If you know licensing, however, you must know that when you license a virtual machine per virtual machine, the minimum is 8 cores per virtual machine. In Azure, when you pay as you go and you take the smallest virtual machine with 2 or 4 cores, you are only billed for 2 core licenses or 4 core licenses. There's no 8 core minimum in Azure pay-as-you-go. We're keeping our fingers crossed that will be replicated to Azure Arc, but we have no confirmation yet. We'll publish a video on this channel as soon as that is confirmed. Windows pay-as-you-go on hosting, we have an unofficial response from the product group. It's not allowed on shared hosting. First of all, it's not written anywhere that it's allowed, so we may assume that it's not allowed, but we asked just in case, and we were told that, unfortunately, it's not allowed on shared hosting, so hosting providers may not use this feature, and clients using BYO on hosting providers may use Azure Arc for SQL pay-as-you-go, but not for Windows Server pay-as-you-go. Don't even attempt. It's going to be non-compliant. On dedicated hardware on the service provider, except for Google, Amazon, and Alibaba, you can do whatever you want, because it's dedicated hardware. It's treated as your own hardware. It may change, because there are people in the product group that want this feature to propagate to hosting platforms. It's a good feature. Hot off the press, Windows Server management capabilities through Azure Arc. Unfortunately, it requires software assurance. I mentioned Azure Update Manager. It requires either a subscription or a software assurance. That's unfortunate that it won't work without that license. This list of features that require software assurance or a subscription comes directly from a blog post. I also linked it in the description, so you can find it there. Big disappointment with Azure Stack HCI that was renamed to Azure Local. That's a new name, Azure Local. The whole Azure stack of products is now Azure Local, and Azure Stack HCI is a part of it. Microsoft did not remove the limitation for Azure Hybrid Use Benefit for Azure Stack HCI. It is still available only to EA and CSP customers. And in combination with the recent news that Microsoft will stop renewing some enterprise agreements and move clients to MCA-E, this benefit is not available to MCA-E customers. Now imagine you use Azure Stack HCI in your on-premises environment. It's an on-premises product, an extension of Azure on your premises. Imagine you use licenses with it now through an enterprise agreement. Microsoft tells you, we can't renew your EA anymore. you need to move to an MCA-E. Unless they reintroduce this right for MCA-E, you won't be able to use that Azure Stack HCI on-premise with your licenses anymore, because the old software assurance will expire and the new licenses won't have this right. Watch this closely. We're watching this very closely. This is a pain. Now, that's all about what's new. So the current version of Windows Server is 2025. Previous versions, please don't confuse versions and editions. Previous versions are 2022, 2019, and so on and so forth. Editions are Datacenter and Standard. And Essentials is still an active edition, but it stopped at the version 2019. And Essentials has unique terms. So mostly we'll be talking today about Datacenter and Standard. And there are two things that you need to understand as well in relation to versions and editions. Downgrades from 2022 to 2019 to 2016, downgrades are always allowed through volume licenses to any previous version. I'm talking about version. With editions, the right is called either down editioning, that's a slang term. Microsoft uses a longer term, they say, using lower edition in place of a higher one. It's down editioning. If you license the server with Windows Server Datacenter, you may run Windows Server Standard or Windows Server Essential on that server or in virtual machines on that server. Windows Server Enterprise 2008 R2 and previous may be licensed with current standard licenses. So that's the down editioning rights. You may not, with one exception, which is on the next slide, you may not deploy a Datacenter edition and use a standard license, except when you use MCA subscription licenses. This is something often overlooked. It's in the product terms. You're allowed to do so. You're allowed to run a Windows Server Datacenter virtual machine and license it with subscription licenses through the Microsoft Customer Agreement, which is CSP and MCA-E. The licensing model for Windows Server is per core plus CAL. And what it means is that you need to license the server and also clients, either users or devices connecting to the server. That's the basic model. There are exceptions when CALs are not required, but I would like it to assume by default that client access license or CALs are required. How do you calculate core licenses? Let's begin with core licenses, kind of the basic licenses. You buy a server, you deploy a server, you roll out a virtual machine. How do you know how many licenses it requires? Now we have two licensing models since 2022. One is the traditional one, when you license the host cores, and the other one is you can license Windows Server starting from version 2022 per virtual machine. That licensing requires software assurance, so we'll get to that. The traditional way of licensing, and this is how most enterprises will license Windows Server. They will use clusters, they will use large hardware servers, highly virtualized, and they will assign Windows Server Datacenter licenses to the hardware layer, which gives unlimited virtualization rights. I will repeat this. If you're not following, I'm speaking too fast, I will repeat this. So how do you calculate licenses when you license Windows Server in the traditional way? Any version that is licensed per core requires at least 8 licenses per CPU and at least 16 licenses per the whole machine. So you have 2 minimums. Fortunately, these days, we see such weak servers less and less often. Modern servers normally have more cores. Still, if you have legacy hardware, if your client has legacy hardware, remember this, because this could lead to a mistake. At the bottom of this slide, you can see an Excel formula. You can just copy and paste it into Excel and use it in your Excel spreadsheet calculations. These are the examples. 1 server, 1 core, still requires 16 licenses. 2 4-core processors, still require 16 licenses, and so on and so forth. How do you calculate licenses per virtual machine from version 2022? And this, when you use licenses, not pay-as-you-go, this applies everywhere, including Azure, including all the other environments. You need at least 8 licenses per virtual machine. At least 8 single-core licenses per virtual machine, and the formula is very simple. This licensing, I remind you, and I'll remind you again, requires either software assurance or active subscription. Perpetual licenses may not be assigned to virtual machines. Remember that you purchase core licenses in packs. You calculate the licenses in single licenses, and then you recalculate it, say thanks to Microsoft, to core packs, because you can only buy either 2 or 8 or 16 core packs via various channels. Ansha is asking, can you share the link regarding CALs not required for pay-as-you-go service? I said, that it's not in product terms. It's on learn.microsoft.com, and the link is in the video description. Look in the description, it's there. Learn page for Windows Server with Azure Arc pay-as-you-go. There's a special page for it. Going back to PACS, remember that you calculate everything in single cores. When you read Microsoft's documentation, they talk about single cores. When you're going through exams on Get Licensing Ready, they talk about single cores. Everything talks about single cores except your procurement that unfortunately has to deal with core PACS. I spent a lot of time convincing people that core PACS are not single licenses. This is a page from Microsoft FAQ, which says that PACS are for convenience. Licenses are still single core licenses. That's it. If you don't trust me, trust Microsoft. Moving on. I don't want to waste time on this. Virtualization is basically you have a computer, and on that computer, on a hardware box, there is an operating system that runs on that box. There's always an operating system, Windows Server in our case, and there are some applications. There may be some applications running inside that operating system. There's a piece of software called Hypervisor, Hyper-V, VMware, Proxmox, KVM, Nutanix. There are other hypervisors these days, not just VMware and Hyper-V. They create pretend computers inside the physical operating system, which have their own name, their own parameters, their own operating system environment. In Hyper-V, there's another confusion. There are containers with Hyper-V isolation. They are effectively full pretend machines. So Hyper-V isolated containers require the same licenses as virtual machines. There are also containers without Hyper-V isolation. Those containers don't require separate licenses because what that is, it's like a sandboxed environment inside a licensed operating system. So thanks, Microsoft, for another confusion. We have physical machines, we have virtual machines, we have containers with Hyper-V isolation that are licensed like virtual machines, and we have containers without Hyper-V isolations that don't require separate licenses. Now, virtualization rules. Here's the question that I'm trying to answer on this slide. How many virtual machines may I run if I assign licenses to a hardware box? Datacenter Edition provides you with the rights for unlimited virtualization. That is why it's so popular in corporate environments. You just license the host or all the blades in a cluster at the physical layer with Windows Server Datacenter Edition licenses, even without software assurance. It's not required, and you can run as many VMs and containers as you want. The only limit is the physical ability of the hardware. However, if you use the old per host licensing with Windows Server Standard, then in that case, you need to count virtual machines and containers with Hyper-V isolation, because only 2 such instances may be run under one set of Windows Server Standard licenses. We get the question, not often, because we don't often work with small businesses, but small businesses sometimes may ask a question, okay, I need to run 3 virtual machines. I need to run 4 virtual machines, and I still want to use standard licenses. May I do so? Yes, you may. It's called license stacking, and I have a special slide for it, so please bear with me until we get there. But by default, if you have a hardware box and you assign, say it has 20 cores, for the sake of an example, 20 cores in total, you assign 20 Windows Server Standard core licenses to that box, you may run 2 virtual machines. That's a simple formula. Don't count containers without Hyper-V isolation. They don't consume separate licenses. When you license individual virtual machines, which you may do now since October 2022, which requires either subscription or software assurance, then the formula is different because you then assign licenses per virtual machine. The minimum of core licenses per virtual machine is 8. So if it's a 2-core virtual machine, you need 8 licenses. If it's an 8-core virtual machine, you need 8 licenses. If it's a 12-core virtual machine, you need 12 licenses. That's the rule. We have a couple of questions from Carl. Has anyone found a use case that's financially sustainable MCA and per VM licensing? Yes, Carl. Half the cases we assessed recently showed us that either the client needs to redesign the entire infrastructure because they run prod, non-prod, licensed with MSDN, Linux, disaster recovery machines, all in the same clusters. And with that crazy mix, per VM licensing is cheaper in many cases. Half the cases I saw personally. If they then consolidate just production Windows Server VMs, then Windows Server Datacenter licensing becomes more interesting. Now with pay-as-you-go, I wonder if for dynamic Windows Server Datacenter it can even compete. I believe it can. I want to see the minimum build cores if they allow just 2 or 4 cores minimum billing. That will make it very cheap, even for permanent workloads. The cost of the pay-as-you-go subscription is roughly 20% more expensive than the cost of a Windows Server standard subscription. So for persistent workloads, I wouldn't use pay-as-you-go. It's a pay-as-you-go. It's supposed to be applied to the resources that require pay-as-you-go, that are kind of logical for pay-as-you-go. We'll see. License stacking, if you want to run 4 virtual machines, you just assign another set of Windows Server standard cores to the host. Going back to our example, you have a 20-core server, you assign 20 Windows Server standard core licenses. It gives you rights to run 2 virtual machines and containers with Hyper-V isolation. You want 2 more, assign another 20 cores, it gives you another set. So it's stacking. You stack them on top of each other. It is perfectly permitted. But don't use it in clusters. I'll explain why. Don't use it in clusters. This only works on standalone hosts. In clusters, there's a threshold after which Datacenter is less expensive. It's either 7 virtual machines with Windows Server or 4 virtual machines if you use Core Infrastructure Suite licenses. It's a pretty low threshold. So for remote offices where you need 3 to 4 VMs, yes, it makes sense to license them with Windows Server Standard, maybe even per virtual machine. Maybe even that will be less expensive. But otherwise, Windows Server Datacenter beats it with a higher number of virtual machines. Take a screenshot of this slide. These are the formulas. There's an Excel formula at the bottom. There's an explanation how it works. Take a screenshot. And I would appreciate if by this time you clicked like, and I really need a sip of water. And moving on. Virtual clusters are groups of hosts. The problem with virtual clusters is that if it's a cluster, the idea about the cluster is that it's resilient. So virtual machines may move, but licenses may not, unless. And if licenses may not move, movement of virtual machines may create a situation when you are non-compliant. How do you deal with that? If you have software assurance, and this is one of those Microsoft's ways, and I don't sell Microsoft licenses, so I'm very critical about them. This is one of those Microsoft ways when they tell you, buy software assurance. Pay for a subscription, and then your licenses are free. Otherwise, they are locked in on a host for 90 days. So if you only have perpetual licenses or OEM licenses, and in Europe you may move OEM licenses, by the way, between the hosts, not anywhere else in the world, licenses are stuck with the host for 90 days. VM moves, license is still there, you're not compliant. So how do you deal with virtual machine mobility? It requires software assurance or a subscription license. In virtual clusters, how do you license them? What's the best way to license them? Datacenter Edition allows for unlimited virtualization everywhere. It always allows unlimited virtualization. Standard Edition per host makes very little sense because the economic threshold then becomes 7 Windows Server VMs with Windows Server licenses in the entire cluster. So if you have a predominantly, I would say, DMZ cluster with 4 hosts and around 2 Windows Server VMs, yes, Windows Server Standard in that case is cheaper. I would still go for per VM licenses if you have software assurance, or if you have CSP subscriptions, I would still license them per VM in that case. But you may use perpetual licenses, just need to assign enough licenses for each host. So you have 2 VMs, and in a cluster, you need to license each host for 2 VMs. That's why it's the problem. And if you use Core Infrastructure Suite licenses, that threshold is only 4 virtual machines in the entire cluster. How can you deal with that? You may use per VM licenses, or you may even combine legacy licensing for previous versions and per VM licensing for versions from 2022. You can mix and match. Normally, what we see in virtual clusters is data center licensing, 99% of cases. And nowadays, it may be time to reassess whether per VM licensing in a cluster is actually cheaper. Do that exercise. Or consolidate your production Windows Server VMs and reduce costs. It's a no-brainer, really. Client access licenses are required for either users or desktops. You may choose. One user requires 1 CAL of one type because there are 3 types of CALs for Windows Server. The Windows Server CAL, Windows Server Remote Desktop Services CAL, and Windows Server Active Directory Rights Management Services RMS CAL. So there are 3 types of CALs. A user requires only 1 CAL of a type if they need access to these services. External users may be licensed either with CALs or with an external connector license, which is per hardware host. External access is licensable unless there's an exception. If a user is licensed, then all the devices used by the user may access the server. If a device is licensed, all the users using the device, for example, a reception desk, they may access Windows Server. So you choose the most economic mix for you, and you can even have a mix of user or device licenses in your estate. Between the servers, CALs are not required. Indirect access also requires a CAL. If they don't connect to that Windows Server directly, they still consume the services from Windows Server, and that requires CAL. Please remember that unless Windows Server CAL is not required explicitly, if a user requires an RDS CAL or an RMS CAL, they also require a Windows Server CAL. That is automatically triggered because they use services of the Windows Server. So you can't just assign an RDS CAL to a user and assume it's licensed. Either there must be an exception allowing that, not using a Windows Server CAL, or you are non-compliant. And the same dependencies apply to external connectors. CAL exceptions. Windows Server CALs are not required. In Azure, you're only required to pay for RDS CALs and RMS CALs. Windows Server CALs are not required. Windows Server Pay-As-You-Go is unofficial now. It's not in product terms, as we discussed. It's in secondary, unofficial, but Microsoft's resources. So hopefully that will be codified in product terms soon. In SPLA, if you consume a Windows Server from SPLA provider, that doesn't require CALs, or Windows Server SALs that they call in SPLA, they just don't exist. And on CSP hosters, when you buy a Windows Server CSP license from the CSP hoster, only when you buy a new license from them. That's when Windows Server CALs are not required, and external connectors as well. In all the other cases, Windows Server CALs are required. RDS and rights management CALs are always required. There are no exceptions. If a user consumes that service, I would even put it this way, if a user is authorized to consume that service, they require an RDS or an RMS CAL. There are so many companies deploying Windows Server virtual machines in Azure, giving their users remote desktop access to those virtual machines. And because they think that Azure doesn't require CALs, RDS CALs are also not required. Yes, they are. That is a non-compliant use. Windows Server Essential, very quick mention, it's an edition for small orgs. You can't even use it in a remote branch because it can't join domain. There's no remote desktop services. Windows Server CALs are not required. In AD, you can only have 25 users. It's brilliant for tiny companies. This is all you need to know. Windows Server 2025 in Azure and on hosting. This is a very important subject. There is a right called Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, which is available to licenses with software assurance and subscription licenses. If you use Azure, and if you have subscription licenses or licenses with SA right now on premises, and if you don't use Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, get yourselves fired, because it's just unreasonable. I would even go and say it's stupid. Because if you have persistent workloads in Azure, something that always runs, even sometimes 5 days a week, and then you shut it down for Saturday and Sunday, licenses brought via Azure Hybrid Use Benefit will still be cheaper than pay-as-you-go in Azure. And all it takes is making sure that you have a license with software assurance or on a subscription, and ticking a box in Azure, in the VM, I have a license. And Microsoft stops billing you for the pay-as-you-go license. And your subscription license, in the majority of cases, will be cheaper than that. It doesn't work like that for SQL. SQL is very bottom line, and in many cases, pay-as-you-go is cheaper. Windows Server Azure Hybrid Use Benefit is a fantastic way of reducing licensing costs and cloud costs as well. Windows Server standard licenses may be used either on-premise or in Azure, so you have to decide where you want to use it. Windows Server Datacenter licenses, please don't argue with me. I know the current wording is atrocious, but if you read it carefully, you will still see that it may be used simultaneously on premises and in Azure. And we saved an American company $500,000 a year by applying that rule recently. Moved them to subscription licensing, and then we use those licenses in the Azure environment. It's a real use case, recent, this year. You still may dual use standard licenses on premises in Azure, but only for 180 days and only one way when you move to Azure. So you have 180 days to lift your workloads from on-prem, move them to Azure, and during that period, use licenses here and there. Then you will have to decide whether you keep them on-premise or you move them to Azure. If you want to move them back, you have to wait 90 days. Data center licenses are dual use. I already mentioned that. So dual use for data center is allowed between on-premise and Azure virtual machines. However, this is where you may not dual use data center licenses. If you move them to dedicated hosts in Azure, then you actually have to move them. The same 180 days limitation applies. So when you use them on Azure virtual machines running in the public cloud, that is simultaneous with on-premise. If you, for example, migrate to a VMware workloads to the Azure VMware solution and move your data center licenses, you only have 180 days before you decide where you will keep them. The attention here is to either that's dedicated hardware or not. Rules are different. Azure Hybrid Use Benefits for Azure Stack HCI, which was just renamed to Azure Local. It's only permitted at the host level, so you can have subscription license or license with SA instead of paying for Azure Stack HCI itself. It's only for Data Center Edition. It gives you right for unlimited virtual machines. That's what you would expect from the Data Center Edition. But it only applies to licenses purchased via EA or CSP channel. And the CSP node is unique to the entire product terms of Microsoft. Microsoft product terms does not have a CSP agreement. CSP is governed by the Microsoft Customer Agreement, MCA. So when you check product terms, when you want to find CSP rules, you have to select Microsoft Customer Agreement in the product terms. But this clause talks specifically about CSP. And we asked Microsoft. Many people asked Microsoft, and Microsoft came back and said, yep, that's the rule. Only EA and CSP channels are allowed to be used for AHUB for Azure Stack HCI, which is currently named Azure Local. Carl is saying, please mind Microsoft products exist that are including CAL equivalencies. Still some using this and pay for Windows Server CALs. That's a true statement. And I linked the Microsoft CAL equivalency page in the description of the YouTube video and in the comments on LinkedIn. If you go to that page, you'll see there's a list of Microsoft products that include various CALs. Check for those that include Windows Server CALs. If your users are covered with any of the Microsoft 365 Enterprise subscriptions like E3 or E5, they have the what's called a CAL equivalency, Windows Server CAL equivalency. If you have E3 and E5 across your entire organization, stop paying for Windows Server CALs. You already have them. That's a very good comment, Carl. Thank you very much. How do you calculate Windows Server licenses in Azure? There's a minimum of 8 cores. If there's a bigger virtual machine, now you can increment the license by 2 cores, as long as you have 2 core packs. Editions don't matter. It doesn't matter what edition of subscription cores or cores covered with software assurance you assign to a Windows Server Azure VMs, as long as you remember that the minimum was 8 cores. And it doesn't matter what edition runs on the Azure VM. Windows Server CALs in Azure are not required. RDS CALs are required. And there are the following things you need to remember. You can't yet, I hope it will change in October. You can't yet pay for RDS CALs in Azure. You may use your own RDS CALs with SA and use them in Azure through dual use rights for RDS CALs with SA, or you may rent RDS SALs subscriber access licenses from your SPLA provider if they manage your Azure workloads. But that is only permitted until October 2025. So in less than a year from now, from when this live is taking place, that right will disappear. We hope Microsoft may extend that deadline, but the hopes are not, we don't have high hopes for that. External RDS access to Azure VMs is not permitted. If you want to bring your Windows Server licenses to Amazon, Google, and Alibaba, which Microsoft calls listed providers, if hardware is dedicated to your own use, you can't bring your own licenses unless they were purchased before, and that doesn't matter what form of license, before the 1st of October 2019, or through an agreement that was signed before the 1st of October 2019. If you had an agreement and then you renewed it, still only the previous license purchased during that term may be used on these providers. And there is no BYOL to these providers for virtual machines. You have to take licenses, pay-as-you-go licenses from these providers. They pay for them through SPLA. And there is no pay-as-you-go via Azure Arc on these providers. What about the other providers? And I'm talking about even large providers like Oracle and Kyndryl and IBM Cloud and Rackspace, GoDaddy, and not necessarily your next door outsourcer, anyone who's not included in the listed providers. Here, the rights are a bit better because if hardware is dedicated to your own use, you may do anything. You can see I have 3 check marks there. Software assurance is not required. For virtual machines, though, you may bring your own licenses, but they require per VM licensing, and therefore they require software assurance or subscription. And as I said at the beginning, when the server with Azure Arc pay-as-you-go is yet not allowed on any providers in shared infrastructures, only on dedicated hardware. Quickly moving on, a few more things about Windows Server 2025. Just remember, take a screenshot of this slide. Just remember that software assurance is I used to call it maintenance. It's actually a subscription license. It's an add-on subscription license. So it gives you additional licensing rights. And the list is long. Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, new version rights, flexible virtualization, per virtual machine licensing, bring your own license, Azure Arc management. And you get these rights when you have a say on both core licenses and on CALs. So CALs must also have software assurance. If you don't have software assurance on CALs and core licenses, then you lose all these benefits. So licenses without a say and without subscription have very limited application. When I get asked, shall we keep a say, shall we cancel the say? In many cases, you may do it harmlessly. But on the other hand, in many cases, even more cases, it will harm your compliance and costs. Please take very special care looking at SA cancellations and renewals. A note about MCA-E and CSP, perpetual licenses through the Microsoft customer agreement don't have any of the software assurance benefits, and there's no way to attach software assurance to those licenses, so just don't consider perpetual licenses through MCA unless it's a small deployment where you don't need anything to be virtualized and mobile and brought somewhere else. It's for small projects. Subscription licenses through the MCA channel have equivalent rights to SA. Almost all of them, 99% of the rights. Everything that's critical will be included in subscription license through MCA. System Center, very quickly. System Center is a very interesting product. It's a management product. There's management software that you use to manage something, and there are managed endpoints. And when I say endpoints, it could be servers, physical machines, virtual machines, clients, or users using multiple machines. System Center does not require licenses for management software, but it requires you to license each managed endpoint. And then there are 2 sides to that. There's server management, where licenses are required for the managed service, the service you manage with System Center. Editions are Datacenter standard exactly as for Windows Server. And the same exact formulas of how to calculate the required Windows Server management licenses you can use from the Windows Server slides. All the same rules for how many you need when you license with Datacenter Edition, how many licenses you need when you license it with Standard Edition, how many virtual machines are covered when you license it with Standard Edition. All of those things are exactly the same as with Windows Server. Exactly the same. Client management licenses are, let's say, endpoint protection, operations manager licenses that you use to license your laptops and desktops or virtual machines, VDIs. They require so-called CMLs, client management licenses. And the logic is very much like CALs. There are some CMLs that are per OSE and per user. Some are only per OSE, some are only per user. Check the product. If there's an operating system client management license, then it covers all the users on the device. If it's a user client management license, then it covers all the devices of that user. System Center Server MLs, there are 2 editions, Standard and Datacenter. The same rules as for Windows Server Standard and Datacenter. The logic is exactly the same. Off-premises use, same rules apply as for Windows Server, including bring your own license. Same rules apply as for Windows Server for off-premises use, including bring your own license. Per VM licensing, all the same. But there is no Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. Azure Hybrid Use Benefit for System Center does not exist. Core Infrastructure Suite is a bundle of Windows Server and System Center server management licenses. Why did Microsoft introduce it? It's just so people buy a bundle instead of buying separate licenses, and maybe somebody was considering System Center but wasn't sure whether they need it. Then when you buy a bundle, it's cheaper. It's a marketing stunt. It's versionless. There are 2 editions, Datacenter and Standard, so there's no CIS 2025, there's no CIS 2019. It's existed since probably Windows Server 2012. It's versionless. It's just a bundle. When you buy it, it's always with SA, it's always current, and you get licenses for Windows Server and System Center server management licenses in the same bundle with a discount between 5 and 15% depending on how you buy. And then as for System Center, again for CIS, the licensing rules, all the licensing rules are exactly the same as for Windows Server. Virtualization is exactly the same as for Windows Server. CIS isn't available in MCA-E, and it would be another fun if Microsoft doesn't allow you to renew your enterprise agreement and says you have to switch to MCA-E. How do you renew your CS licenses? You may still do that through MPSA. That's another form of a Microsoft agreement. But would they allow that? And what will be the way out of this? Your cost will go up if they don't allow a renewal of that license. It's going to hit you hard. I'm talking about 20-30% increase in costs. There's no solution to that yet. CIS is only sold with software assurance. Core licenses are sold in packs of 2 and 16 because they don't exist in MCA. There are no 8 core packs. Always clarify whether your calculations are done in packs or in single cores. Azure Hybrid Use Benefits apply to CIS, but only to the Windows Server component. When you move those licenses to Azure, System Center component basically disappears. For off-premises use, the rules apply exactly as for Windows Server, including BYL and flexible virtualization. In any shared or dedicated environment, read the rules for Windows Server. Core infrastructure suite rules are exactly the same. Client access, same rules applies for Windows Server, exactly the same. This is our hotline email. Send us your questions, and we'll help as much as we can. Can anyone obtain CIS, or is it limited to EA? No, it's also available through the MPSA, Microsoft Product and Services Agreement. I need to check whether you can still sign it. I mean, in theory, yes, it's an active agreement. In theory, you can sign it. The question is whether Microsoft lets you. Because what Microsoft is trying to do right now is to move everybody slowly to MCA-E or CSP. So smaller clients below 2,400, and a lot of companies are below that bracket, will probably be incentivized and convinced and pushed, if they don't agree nicely, to the CSP. Bigger clients will be dealing directly with Microsoft. MCA-E is a direct relationship with Microsoft. That's why it's only sold now in direct markets. So bigger clients will be moved to MCA-E. I wonder how they will address this in indirect markets. I think EA will survive for much longer in countries like Israel, Ukraine, other countries where Microsoft doesn't operate directly with their clients. What is the main difference between MCA-E and MCA? Let me explain this. MCA, Microsoft Customer Agreement, is an agreement under which there are 2 ways to procure licenses, 3 ways to procure licenses under the same exact agreement. The first one is online, through the web. Hypothetically, you open a new company, like we did a few years ago, and instead of going to a licensing reseller, you decided, I have a credit card, I'll buy licenses myself from Microsoft. You go on the Microsoft.com page, buy a license from there, pay with a credit card, your company credit card. They make you sign the Microsoft Customer Agreement. That's MCA. If you go to a CSP partner and buy so-called CSP licenses, what you actually buy, not CSP licenses, you buy MCA licenses through the CSP partner. Again, it's the same exact Microsoft Customer Agreement. MCA-E is another channel using the same Microsoft Customer Agreement, which is directly with Microsoft. There are no intermediary partners. The reason why it says MCA-E is because it's an MCA channel for enterprises. E stands for enterprise. MCA-E now requires other support plans. Have you ever tried to get direct Microsoft support if you didn't have Premier or Unified support? Yeah, good luck with that. CIS with MPSA have no AHB for Windows Server then. You mean Azure Stack HCI, your beloved product. That's what you mean, don't you? Anyway, thanks again. Goodbye.